Hi everyone, welcome to the Clicks Quick channels. In today's videos, we're gonna see a movie called A Beautiful Mind. The movie appears at Princeton University in September 1947. We get our first glimpse of John Nash. John Nash arrives at Princeton University as a new graduate student. He is a recipient of the prestigious Carnegie for Mathematics. Though he was promised a single room, his roommate Charles, a literature student, greets him as he moves in and soon becomes his best friends. Nash also meets a group of other promising maths and science graduate students, Martin Hansen, Saul, Ainsley, and Bender, with whom he set up an awkward friendship. Nash admits that Charles is better with numbers than people. We see an unsuccessful attempt of Nash at conversation with a girl at a local bar. The girl suggests John that he buy her a drink. John responds by proposing her, inviting her to have a free exchange, and the girl slaps him. Nash is seeking a truly original idea for his thesis paper, and he is under increasing pressure to develop his thesis so he can begin to work. A particularly harsh rejection from a woman at the bar is what ultimately inspires his fruitful work in the concept of governing dynamics, a theory in mathematical economics. After the conclusions of Nash's studies as a student at Princeton, he accepts a prestigious appointment at the MIT, along with his friends Sol and Bender. 5 years later, while teaching a class on calculus at MIT, he places a particularly interesting problem on the chalkboard that he dares his students to solve. When his student Alicia Lard comes to his office to discuss the problem, the two fall in love and eventually marry. On return visits to Princeton, Nash runs into his former roommate Charles and meets Charles' young niece Marcy, whom he adores. He also encounters a mysterious Department of Defense agent, William Parcher. Nash is invited to a secret invited uh, State Department of Defense facility in the Pentagon to crack a complex encryption of an enemy telecommunication. Nash is able to decipher the code mentally to the astonishment of the other code breakers. Parker observes Nash's performance from above, while partially concealed behind a screen. Parker gives Nash a new assignment to look for patterns in magazines and newspapers, ostensibly toward a Soviet plot. He must write a report of his findings and place them in a specified mailbox. After being chased by the Russians and an exchange of gunfire, Nash becomes increasingly paranoid and begins to behave erratically. After observing this erratic behavior, Alicia informs a psychiatric hospital. Later, while delivering a guest lecture at Harvard University, Nash realizes that he is being watched by a hostile group of people. Although he attempts to flee, he is forcibly sedated and sent to a psychiatric facility. Nash in turn seemingly confirms his belief that the Soviets were trying to extract information from him. He views the official of the psychiatric facility as Soviet kidnappers. Alicia, desperate to help her husband, visits the mailbox and retrieves all of the never open. Top Secret recommends that Nash had delivered there. When confronted with this evidence, Nash is finally convinced that he has been hallucinating. The Department of Defense agent William Parcher's night secret assignment to decode Soviet messages was in fact all a delusion. Even more surprisingly, Nash's friend Charles and his niece Marcy are also only products of Nash's mind. After a painful series of insulin shock therapy sessions, Nash is released on the condition that he agrees to take antipsychotic medication. However, the drugs create negative side effects that affect his relationship with his wife and most dramatically, his intellectual capacity. Frustrated, Nash secretly stops taking his medication and hoards his pill, triggering a relapse of his psychosis. While batching his infant son, Nash becomes distracted and wanders off. Alicia is hanging laundry in the backyard and observes that the back gate is open. She discovers that Nash has turned an abandoned shed in a nearby grove of trees into an office for his work for Parcher. Upon realizing that what was happened, Alicia runs into the house to confront Nash and barely saves her child from drowning in the bathtub. When she confronts him, Nash claims that his friend Charles was watching the son. Alicia runs to the phone call to the psychiatric hospital for emergency assistance. Parcher urges Nash to kill his wife, but Nash angrily refused to do such things. After arguing with Parcher, Nash accidentally knocks Alicia to the ground. Afterwards, Alicia flees to house in fear with their child, but Nash steps in front of her to prevent her from leaving. After a moment, Nash realizes that Marcy is a figment of his hallucination because she remains the same age since the day he met her. He tells Alicia she never gets old. Only then does he accept that all three people are in fact part of his hallucination. Caught between the intellectual paralysis of the antipsychotic drugs and his delusion, Nash and Alicia decide to try to live with his abnormal conditions. Nash consciously says goodbye to the three of them forever in his attempts to ignore his hallucinations and not fit his demons. However, he thanks Charles for being his best friend over the years and says a tearful goodbye to Marcy, stroking her hair and calling her a baby girl, telling them both he won't them anymore. Nash grows older and approaches his old friends and intellectual rival Martin Hansen, now head of the Princeton Mathematics Department, whom grants him permissions to work out of the library and audit classes. Though the university will not provide him with his own office, Nash still suffers from hallucinations and mentions taking newer medications he is ultimately able to live with and largely ignores his psychotic episodes. He takes his situations in stride and humorously checks to ensure that any new acquaintance are in fact real people, not hallucinations. Nash eventually ends the privilege of teaching again. He is honored by his fellow professors for his achievement in mathematics and goes on to win the Nobel Prize in economics for his revolutionary work on game theory. Nash and Alicia are about to leave the auditorium in Stockholm when John sees Charles, Marcy, and Bartos standing and smiling. Alicia asks John what's wrong. John replies nothing. With that, they both leave the auditorium, and the movie ends here. Thank you for watching.